Good afternoon, everybody. I understand in a conference on IRS compliance, I'm the comic relief. All right? So, I think that maybe if I had been a serial killer in life and had died, I would wake up in a room full of people discussing IRS compliance forever. But I am here to talk about USIsrael Relationship. In their case, the title here is very apt. It's the perfect storm. Perfect storm. If you look at the news of the last couple of weeks, you have interviews being given by advisors close to President Obama, assigning certain epithets to the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Do I have to repeat it here today? No, but it was very funny because I spent 48 hours on Israeli television trying to find the Hebrew equivalent to that word. It doesn't exist. Wait, it's chicken and it's this. Wait a minute, what does it mean together? We don't quite get that. And, rarely does a week go by where the State Department spokeswoman doesn't have something critical to say about our building policies in our city of Jerusalem. Though in the last 24 hours, in view of the horrible terrorist attack yesterday, the condemnations emanating from Washington, I think, were very praiseworthy indeed and welcomed. But we have gone through a bumpy period, and it begs the question, where are the U.S.-Israel relations today, and how can I get up here in front of you and say that in spite of everything you've read about over the last 5 years, I will assert unequivocally that the U.S.-Israel relationship is the deepest and most multifaceted alliance which the United States has had with any foreign power in the post-World War II period. So it seems counterintuitive. Certainly it runs against the overwhelming press evidence that has built up over the last half decade, but that is the fact. And then to explain it, you have to go back. You have to go back before Israel's creation. You have to actually go back before America's creation and look at the beginnings of the American Republic, the exodus of Puritan pilgrims from England. At the beginning of the 17th century, the Puritans had suffered terribly under the Church of England. They looked in their Bible to find a biblical model for overcoming their suffering at the hands of the Church of England. They looked back in the New Testament. They didn't find the model. They had to look further back, look back into what they called the Old Testament. And they found something rather extraordinary there. They found a God who spoke directly to his people in their own language. You get that? God speaks only one language, as far as we know. Speaks Hebrew. And we like that. It's true. And the Puritans loved this story, and they adopted the story. They became the new Jews. They escaped England / Egypt across the Atlantic Ocean, which they likened to the Sinai. They got to the new Promised Land. They immediately named 1,000 North American cities after biblical cities. All right? You got your Sharons and your Jerichos, and a lot of Bethels. Bethel. And they gave their kids Hebrew names, and they taught Hebrew at all their universities. James Madison, the fourth president, was a Hebrew major at Princeton, and he failed. He had to go do an extra year. I can commiserate with James Madison. They deeply internalized the biblical story. And at the conclusion of the American Revolution in 1783, there was a big debate about what was going to be the national symbol of the United States. And some people in Congress thought that the bald eagle should be the symbol of the United States. But another group of very prominent Americans said, no, the symbol of the United States should show Moses leading the children of Israel out of bondage into the land of Israel. And heated debate. At the end, America got the phallically challenged bird as its symbol. Became very close, almost had Moses. But the designers of the Moses symbol were Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. That's how deeply they had internalized the biblical Jewish narrative. And for many of these founding fathers and their descendants, the notion that they were the new Jews and that they inherited a new promised land meant that they actually had a kinship, a relationship with the old Jews. They were mishpucha to the old Jews. And they had a close affinity to the old promised land, the land of Israel. And they concluded that to be good Christians, to be good Americans, they had to help the old Jews get back to their land. Thus was born the notion of Restorationism. They were going to restore the Jews, and it was very prevalent. John Adams was the second president of the United States, said that it was his fondest dream that someday a Jewish army, 100,000 strong, would march back into Judea and reclaim it as a Jewish kingdom. Abraham Lincoln 1863, said that he would pledge to help restore the Jews to their promised land once he had restored the unity of the United States of America. You had Woodrow Wilson, who was the son and grandson of Presbyterian ministers. In the spring of 1917, the British government approached him and questioned him whether he would support the issuance of a declaration in which the British Empire, the largest empire of its day, would throw its weight behind the creation of a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel, because many people in Britain objected to it. The Arabs, they had all this oil that the British needed. Wilson said, yes, it was my firmest belief that someday I could help the Jews restore their kingdom. And the Balfour Declaration, issued that year, became the basis of the British Mandate, which became the basis of the 1947 Partition Resolution, creating a Jewish state here. And the big question in the spring of 1948 was whether the United States would recognize the newfound Jewish state. And in an event which has actually no parallel in the annals of American diplomatic history, every single presidential advisor in the State Department, the Defense Department, the Pentagon said to the president, don't do it. The Jews can't fight. We're going to have to send our army there to defend them. They're going to be a bunch of communists. The Arabs are going to cut off oil to the west. Western Europe's going to fall to the Soviet Union. All these different things they said to the president. At 11 minutes after 6 p.m., on May 14th, 1948, Harry Truman made the United States of America the first country on earth to recognize the recreated Jewish state. And when asked why he did this, why he went against the advice of all of his senior counselors, Truman had one response. He said, I'm Cyrus. He said, I'm Cyrus. You know your Bible? Who is Cyrus? Ancient Persian king who restored the Jews. That's the way he saw himself, Harry Truman. Remember, Truman was a strict Baptist. He claimed to have read the Bible every day till age 14. Amazing thing. The United States today remains the most religiously observant country in the industrialized world. More people go to church every week. They go to mosques and synagogues too, but go to church every week in the United States than any other industrialized country, and people read their Bible and they make the same conclusion. It's not only evangelicals. I can't tell how many times I'd walk into some office of a congressman who represented some district in West Texas that was 5 times the size of the state of Israel, probably had no Jewish constituents. He'd have a Bible opened up on his desk. He'd point to that part of Genesis where it says, I will bless you who bless my people. And he'd say to me, how much do you want for Iron Dome? No kidding. Many times it happened. Take it very, very seriously. But Israel comes into being in 1948 not just as a Jewish state. Israel comes into being as a democratic state. It's the only democracy in this region. It is the only region, it's the only country which, like the United States, has rule of law, representative government, civil rights. Our Declaration of Independence is taken, in some places, word for word from the American Declaration of Independence because the people who wrote it were American. And that becomes another very important pillar in the US-Israel relationship. Israel is not only one of the oldest democracies in the world today. There's only not many in the world. Out of 193 countries, not many democracies. But we're part of a very select group of countries, United States, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, that have never known a second of non-democratic rule. Think about that. That's in spite of being under unspeakable pressures from the moment of our creation. We've never had a moment of non-democratic rule. We're the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to 9/11. If you haven't seen it, go see it outside of Jerusalem. It's very moving. We have the only country in the Middle East that has a memorial to Martin Luther King. We have a memorial to John Fitzgerald Kennedy. We're the only country in the Middle East that has not one but 2 replicas of the Liberty Bell, both inscribed with the words of Leviticus, all right, by the founding fathers. You know where one of them is, all right? Liberty Park down in Jerusalem. It's amazing. So together with the spiritual ties and the sheer democratic values, we already have a very multifaceted relationship. Then the strategic alliance. That did not exist before June 1967. June 1967, Israel fought a war, the 6-Day War. We won the war. We beat a number of Soviet-backed armies, but we fought that war without using or firing a single American bullet. We did not have a defense relationship with the United States. We had French bullets. And the French, on the eve of that war, switched sides. But on the 7th day of the war, American policymakers woke up and said, whoa, there's this powerhouse in the Middle East that just defeated all these Soviet-backed armies. Maybe we should be allied with that country. And thus was born the U.S.-Israel Strategic Alliance, which has become one of the broadest strategic alliances in the world. And if I had an hour, we don't, Philip, because time is money. I would just spend time talking about the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship, because it's every field. It's joint maneuvers, it's special forces training, it's weapons development, it is medical military technology, it is intelligence sharing at the highest level. There's no two countries that have a closer intelligence relationship than the United States and Israel. Not whatsoever. And you'll hear that from the head of the Senatorial Congressional Select Committee on Intelligence, the House Select Committee on Intelligence. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. Everyone will agree on that. Very close relationship. It's American ships pulling into, military ships, naval ships pulling into Haifa. It's military Air Force planes landing at Ben Gurion Airport. It's $1.2 billion worth of American military equipment that is stored underground in the state of Israel. It's pre-positioned here. It's amazing, just on that level. And so you had these three pillars. Now we have a fourth pillar that's rapidly rising, and it should be of great interest to you, and that's the economic pillar. Israel was never an economic interest in the United States, but it's rapidly becoming that. About 300 U.S. high-tech companies have their R&D centers here in Israel. Apple, which never had an R&D center outside of the state of California, now has 3 in the state of Israel. They're building another one in Herzliya. They're going to employ about 1,000 Israeli engineers there. It's pretty amazing. And investments in this country have gone off the charts. It's the one thing that keeps on going up all the time is the United States investment in Israel and American investment in the United States at a time when so many American employers are outsourcing to Asia. Israeli employers, basically factories, are outsourcing to the United States. Tens of thousands of Americans employed in Israeli companies. It's amazing. Like when I became the first Israeli ambassador to go to Puerto Rico, I was treated like a hero because Teva employs so many people in Puerto Rico. Tens of thousands. Sabra Hummus, with its 2 big factories in Virginia. Sabra Hummus has now become the official dip of the NFL. You know? Okay. Didn't know they had. I've heard of an official spike, but never an official dip. But it's very big. And basically, Israeli components are in most of your computers and most of your cell phones. That's another pillar. We're going to look at that in the future. You put all this together, you really have an extraordinary relationship that is not rivaled by anyone. I don't know if the United States has a spiritual connection with France. I don't know if it has that type of multifaceted connection really with any other country in the world. But does this mean that the United States and Israel agree on everything? We do not agree on everything, you may have noticed. We have disagreed about the peace process. We have disagreed about the status of the territories captured in 1967. These are not new disagreements. The administration is going back to Johnson, objected to the settlement policy. Administration is going back to Truman, did not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It's an anomalous part of any alliance where one part of the alliance doesn't recognize the capital of the other part of the alliance. So, from this podium in this hotel, I will tell you again categorically that Israel recognizes Washington, D.C. as the capital of the United States. You're laughing. But I got a daughter who was born in Jerusalem with an American passport, and her passport says born in Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, Israel, because the United States doesn't recognize Jerusalem as part of Israel. It's anomalous to say the least. So we have not agreed about the peace process. We have not agreed about the Iranian nuclear program. And that's probably the deepest disagreement. Part of that disagreement is structural. America's a big country. It's far away from the Middle East. It's not threatened with national annihilation by the Iranians. It's got the biggest military capabilities in the world. America can afford to take risks. When Secretary of State Kerry gets up in front of the Senate and says, we can afford a 12-month breakout period. 12 months before the Iranians can break out and create a bomb. Israel can't afford it. Israel's a small country. We're located in Iran's backyard. We're threatened with national obliteration every day by the Iranian regime. And we have great capabilities, but they're not American capabilities. We do not have aircraft carriers. We do not have strategic bombers. It's a very big difference. Our margin for error on Iran is exactly zero. Exactly zero. So it's different. But part of it is also conceptual. It's ideological. The Obama administration came into office in 2009 and said, we're going to reach out our hand to Iran. We want to get onto a new page with Iran. We view Iran as an irrational, genocidal regime. And I think that's I don't represent the government of Israel today, but I'll tell you without reservation, that is the way I feel about it, about Iran. I very much disagree with the Obama administration's perception of Iran as a rational, cost-benefit analysis type regime. We don't believe that. I don't believe that. So we have our differences. But I can also say that the U.S.-Israel relationship is not just about this policy or that policy or even this individual or that individual. There have been all sorts of relationships between presidents and prime ministers going back. We have very short memories here. People won't forget that Eisenhower had a terrible relationship with Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion had a terrible relationship with Kennedy. People forget these things. It is the American people. Today, support for Israel among the American population is at close to an all-time high. About 74% of Americans define themselves as pro-Israel. How that's worked out is an interesting statistic, but that's it. By the way, maybe interesting for you people in the tax field, the higher the income you have in the United States, the more likely you are to be pro-Israel. Direct correlation between income and positive feelings toward Israel. Interesting statistic. And the number's always going up. Even during last summer, when we were getting slammed on much of the international media, the American media, support for Israel went up again. Keeps on going up. During the period, I came into office in 2009, I left in 2013. I came in, it was at 60%. When I left, it was 74%. It went up probably because I left. But it just keeps going. Americans basically get this place. They basically get that we stand for the same ideas. We share deep spiritual ties. We defend ourselves against very similar enemies. I was on CNN last night, and Jake Tapper, CNN, said something that I wouldn't have said as ambassador. It's amazing. He says, more Americans have been killed by Palestinians than have been killed by ISIL, which happens to be completely true. But to have the interviewer on CNN say it was very interesting. It's underscored. We're facing the same enemies. We are living through a time of profound turbulence, not just in Jerusalem, but throughout the Middle East. Looking ahead, I'm a historian by training. I have enough trouble predicting the past. But looking forward, I think there's only one thing you can certainly say, and that is that the United States and a strong America remains in everybody's interest. Israel's interest, the world's interest. Israel will continue to have one ally that will stand for these same principles, that will stand behind us. That's the United States. And as if we have a choice of allies out there, we don't. But the United States also does not have much of a choice. Israel will remain the only technologically, scientifically, militarily robust country. It'll be the only country that will remain unerringly democratic, sometimes flagrantly democratic. And it's the only country in this part of the world, and not only in this part of the world, that will remain unabashedly and proudly pro-American. American embassy is only a couple hundred yards down the road. Go down and see if you see a protest out there. Go down if you see American flags being burnt out there. Where in the Middle East is this not happening? Only here. I escorted President Obama here in 2013. Where else in the Middle East could he give speeches like that? In Cairo? Damascus? Only here. So looking forward 5-10 years, there's one thing going to be certain. Israel will remain not only America's close ally, I think Israel will remain America's ultimate ally. I hope that provided you with a little comic relief. Real about comic relief, you can see the way Phil does my tax forms. That's comic relief.